Welcome to Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. Off the subs bench, hopefully to exceed XG, the Divock Origi of the operation. I'm Guy Clarke, and alongside me, our continual output merchant, it is, of course, Josh Williams. Josh, how are we?
I'll take that, mate. Yeah, I'm good. We forgot to let our listeners know last week, didn't we, that Dave was actually going to be off for this. But you are a more than capable stand-in, mate. I have faith in you.
Well, you've more faith in me than I do. But anyway, as you say, Dave is off for the week, so unfortunately lumbered with me. The show must go on, and to do that as well, though, thanks to you guys listening in as ever. We reached out to you for your questions for a Q&A in today's episode, and you haven't disappointed. Josh has been busy sifting through, I think, over 100 questions, haven't you, Josh?
Yeah, 24-hour window, and we get over 100 questions. So, incredible stuff, really. So, for all those who submitted questions, thank you. And we'll do our best to get round to yours today. But, with there being over 100 and us having an hour window, it's going to be tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, we're going to get to the Q&A, but we've also got Villa to talk about, high defensive lines, goalkeeping, and all of that. So we're going to use your questions really to try and get through that as much as we can. But as Josh says, if we can't get to all of them, apologies in advance. But Josh, before we get to the listener questions, we best sort of talk about Aston Villa. Nobody saw that one coming. What were your initial sort of thoughts and reactions to the games? Have you calmed down now?
It was a tough watch, must be honest. It was certainly not expected. Before the game, I think I might have predicted a 2-1. Didn't know Mane was going to miss the game, I don't think. I can't remember what other news came out. Allison was obviously out. We will get to that sort of stuff, but I've never really seen a game like it from a Liverpool perspective. It's the heaviest defeat Liverpool have ever had in the Premier League. And it did get to a point in the game where I just started laughing, really. It got beyond the hate and the anger. And it got to the point where it was just, okay, this is a bit weird now. This is unprecedented, really.
Yeah, how do you, looking at the numbers even then, sort of try and fathom it? Because looking at sort of, as you say, that the underlying numbers, it wasn't a 7-2 at all. In fact, it was probably half of a 7-2, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, but at the same time, if you're giving away that much, you are open to conceding virtually every shot, especially when you've got Adrian in goal. So the expected goals on the day, Liverpool posted 1.8, which is usually fine, really. It's in the region of what we post most weeks, I suppose. Maybe a little bit higher on field. But we faced 3.9 XG, which is a lot. That's high. For perspective, last season when we lost 3-0 away to Watford posted 2.2. So for Villa to post 3.9, I didn't go back and check, but that's got to be probably the highest that Klopp has allowed Liverpool to face as Liverpool boss. I think when we lost 5-0, I think it might have been to City last season. They were just clinical, really, City, but I don't think they created absolutely loads of clear-cut chances like Villa did.
There was also obviously the 5-0 earlier on in his reign, wasn't there, away at City when Mane got sent off, but I suppose you caveat that against being down to 10 men. It's just so bizarre on Sunday.
Yeah, well, even that one, I recall Leo Sané scoring from outside the box. I think Gundogan might have scored from outside the box at the time. This one was different, and this one was with 11 men. It was just, I've never seen anything like it. So Liverpool took 14 shots. Aston Villa took 18. Not much in that. 11 shots on target for Aston Villa. 8 for Liverpool. Liverpool had 69% of the ball. So, I mean, if you showed me them numbers before the game, I'd expect Liverpool to lose, certainly facing 3.9 XG. I'd expect Liverpool to lose maybe... If Allison was in goal, I'd expect Liverpool to lose that maybe 3-2. Something like that, 3-1 maybe. But for it to get to 7, I mean, I must admit, it's not... It doesn't happen. This is not going to happen again. Like, 3 massive deflections, a gift inside 5 minutes from your goalkeeper, and a set piece. conceding from a set piece. That's not going to happen every week. So it was just very much Liverpool playing terrible, combined with absolutely awful luck, bad fortune, combined with high risk football, and all that was kind of a recipe for disaster on the day, if you like.
Yeah, it certainly did seem that way. And I suppose, as you mentioned that early goal, Ollie Watkins in the third or fourth minute of the game, that XG at sort of 0.5, it really was a gift that Villa were given early on in the game. You mentioned, before we get on to the questions, and we'll get to them in due course, but you mentioned the amount of shots that Liverpool faced in the game, 18. Remarkably, and looking at the shot location, the map of it, 13 of those were in the box as well. That it just doesn't seem to be something you associate with this defensive setup that Liverpool have.
Yeah, it was just a product of the bad performance on the day, particularly, we're going to talk about the highlights stuff. There's thousands of questions we got on that. And I will say that any questions that you sent in on Villa, I'm talking about that now. So we won't be addressing your question individually. We're talking about that right now. But yeah, it was just one of them where we had no cohesion, no pressing from the front, no protection for the back four defensive line. And when we had the ball, just poor decisions being made. Joe Gomez was just giving the ball to the opposing team. Trent's elaborate possession play was not what it usually is. Firmino was kind of I've described Firmino in the past as kind of offering a bit of a glue in the decisive areas of the pitch close to goal. But in and around the opposing goal, it's difficult to keep possession. And Liverpool have got plenty of risk takers in and around those areas. Firmino offers the glue in that sort of thing. On this day, he didn't. He was just another player who just drifted into the background, kept losing the ball, got bullied a little bit. It was just a bad day all round. But in terms of conceding 7, it was not that bad. It was just, the reason we conceded 7 was just an accumulation of terrible luck and bad decisions, and it was just an all-round horrible day. I think Klopp said after the game that it was anything that could have gone wrong, and everything that we could have done wrong ourselves, we did. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you've allayed a few people's fears there, because I think there was maybe a feeling that the key to the lock had been found, and maybe this was going to undermine Liverpool. Let's get on to the questions then. And first up, we've just labelled it various because there were so many asking about it. The high line, Josh.
Right, the high line. I'm glad I got questions on this, because it needs clearing up here. So the high line is fine. This is not a question of the high line, but everybody has used the high line to describe what they think is the problem. So Liverpool are a high pressing team. To do a high press, you have to have a high line. You have to be compact to press. Otherwise, your press, say for example, Salah and Firmino press on their own, and the midfield isn't backing them up and the defence isn't backing them up, you can get played through quite easily. So the high line is a must, and the high line is fine, providing, and this wasn't the case of Villa, providing the pressure ahead of the high line is quite intense. The way a high line gets exploited is the spacing behind, but that spacing behind doesn't get exploited much against Liverpool, because the likes of Henderson, Wijnaldum, Fabinho, Salah, Mane, they're on top of the opposition, don't give you the second to look up and think, which pass can I make to exploit that high line? So teams don't get a chance. What this issue is about is the offside trap. It's not a high line thing, it's an offside trap thing. That's where the risk comes in. That's where, there's a question mark attached to whether it's a good idea, whether it's a bad idea, sort of thing. But I think it's not something Liverpool have always done. It's something that we've done, in my opinion, we referenced this last season. It's something that Liverpool have done since last season, since the introduction of VAR in particular. And that's a calculated risk. If Liverpool know that they need to catch the opposing player offside by an inch, whatever it may be, for his shoulder to be offside or whatever it is, it gets given. So Liverpool have got certainty that if they catch an opposing player offside, it'll get given. If they don't catch an opposing player offside and he's through on goal, they then have to beat Allison in a 1v1, which is easier said than done. So considering those two massive aspects, Liverpool are deeming it to be worth the risk. But it is a risk because of that. Because if it gets beaten, if opposing players get through, they do gain a 1v1, and that more often than not that'll probably result in a goal, especially if Adrian's in goal as opposed to Allison.
Yeah, I think you're obviously spot on with the whole pressing thing. It did feel at times as though Liverpool's midfield wasn't there, which is so sort of abnormal. And point you make on the high press, I think it's 41 extra offsides Liverpool have got than any other side in the Premier League since the beginning of last season, which is quite remarkable. It's pretty much an offside every game more that Liverpool are getting there for than the next best in the league, who I think are West Ham United. But one game that sort of springs to mind for me, I think it was Wolves at home last season, around Christmas time, turn of the new year. I can't remember if it was an equalising goal or a goal to go ahead. Pedro Neto scored it and was really giving it some in front of the main stand at Anfield. But that got disallowed by VAR, as you're saying, for pretty much his toenail being offside. But it's what it's there for, and it does prove that it does work. This is one game in which maybe it has been unhinged. Let's get to some more of the questions then. And Panu Irola and Abhinav Sharma, apologies if I've pronounced any of those names wrong, says, what were the biggest differences when compared then to the Liverpool-Arsenal game and then obviously this game against Aston Villa? I feel you're probably going to say that intensity that we certainly saw at Anfield that was lacking at Villa Park.
Yeah, well, in terms of statistical differences, it's a complete different ballgame. I mean, when it comes to dominating the opposing team, Liverpool did exactly that, really, against Arsenal. Just trying to get the numbers up now, but I'm pretty sure that Arsenal, despite Liverpool playing the same high line, and this is the perks of the high line, Arsenal took 4 shots in the game. Liverpool took 21. And then against Aston Villa a week later, you're playing with largely the same system, albeit without Allison, without Mane, but with everyone else pretty much the same, I think. You face 18 shots. It's not the high line that's much of an issue, really, providing Everton in front is intense, and Everton is the midfield's working, the front three are working. I mean, obviously Mane was out, that can influence things. But Jota is a good presser of the ball, so it shouldn't have happened the way it happened. But in terms of, making sure that the result is taken care of as much as it possibly can be by your own performance, Liverpool against Arsenal and Liverpool against Aston Villa was polar opposites. Liverpool posted, I mean, according to Understat, which looks at the numbers of the game and gives a team a percentage chance of winning. Understat looked at the expected goals against Arsenal, the shots on target, the possession, all that sort of stuff. And without looking at what the result was, Understat reckoned that Liverpool had a 75% chance of winning that game, based on the performance. Against Villa, Liverpool had a 14% chance. Aston Villa had 70%. So it was a complete massive difference, despite roughly the same game plan almost. I mean, I suppose you've got to give a lot of credit to Aston Villa at the same time. They had a completely different game plan to Arsenal, and it worked.
Yeah, it certainly did, and they certainly did get the benefit of things. Let's get to another question then. Peter Fleming says, in the Villa game, it was quickly obvious that a number of players weren't on their game, yet no substitutions were made until the second half. How has Klopp's substitution strategy changed games, and does he ever make first half changes of personnel?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I don't think Klopp ever really does make first half substitutions, early substitutions, that sort of thing, unless it's to protect the player who's having a really terrible day. Like Lovren comes to mind against Spurs. That was an early one taking Joe Gomez off against Aston Villa, eventually taking Naby Keita off at half time. Was it half time? Might have been just after half time against Villa. So yeah, I think it's a protection thing more than anything. In terms of making substitutions in the game, I think Klopp makes more fitness based substitutions than a lot of coaches, considering, you know, is the intensity and is the grade that I think he's got in sports science and that sort of stuff. I think he considers that more often than, say, for example, a Roy Hodgson. And I think when it comes to making tactical substitutions, we don't make that many. It does seem to be keeping the 4-3-3. Usually, maybe we'll make a switch to 4-2-3-1 if we need to claw back a goal, or if we're facing a back five and we want to pin that back five back by using a 4-2-3-1. The front four can kind of pin back the back five if the spacing is right, sort of thing. But yeah, I don't think substitutions, to be honest, that's something that I'm overly concerned about with Liverpool, considering by that point we usually have the results decided, really.
Yeah, it certainly does seem to be that case. I'll pair a couple of questions here together then. Ahmed Gokal says, is the goal leaking against Villa and Leeds a sign of decline in the defensive structure? And we've also got Victor saying, is there any need to change and tweak our system according to opponents? He feels as though Klopp's always stubborn and persistent to some players, even when they're not performing. So is there a decline in the defensive structure? And ultimately, do Liverpool need to look at rectifying how they line up against certain teams?
Well, in terms of Villa and Leeds, I think I need to make a big point on this one. Liverpool conceded 3 against Leeds. Okay. Liverpool conceded 7 against Aston Villa. They both look like bad defensive performances on the face of it, sort of thing. But they weren't. They were completely different games. And this is kind of a bit of an alternative perception that I think I would like to more people in football to start looking at, to be honest.
Myth busting.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I mean, it's easy to look at the results, look at how many Liverpool have conceded, and saying that was a bad defensive performance. But against Leeds, Liverpool faced, I think, only 6 shots. And I think only 3 were on target, and all 3 found a net. Now, in any match, really, where you're facing 6 shots and half of them are on target, that's a good defensive performance, really. If you're keeping the opposing team to 6 shots and you're taking, I think it was 22 yourself, that is a good defensive performance. I think I referenced a few weeks ago that, you know, Liverpool conceding goals against Salzburg and, you know, teams like that. And somebody said that Liverpool had a bad defensive performance against Atletico in the Champions League at Anfield. Now, they've said that because Liverpool on the day conceded, I think it might have been 3 after extra time. But the actual defensive performance for the whole game, as in keeping the opponents away from your goal and restricting them from taking shots, it was great. So there's a big difference between conceding goals and being bad defensively. Big difference. And the other side of the question was, what was that again?
Do Liverpool then need to sort of tweak the system? If it's not bad defensive showing, then against certain oppositions, do Liverpool need to sort of tweak how they go about games?
Well, I think we do. I think it might go beneath the surface a little bit, but I do think we do that. Like, I think, say, for example, against Atletico, Liverpool played the usual 4-3-3 and the usual principles of high pressing, high defensive line, intensity and all that sort of stuff. But we played Oxlade-Chamberlain on the right of the midfield, the midfield 3, that is. And he, alongside Salah and Trent, kind of formed a trio out wide. And they just focused on gaining wide overloads against Atletico Madrid because of how good Simeone's team are at blocking off the centre. So if you just overload the wide areas, you could argue that is an alternative tactic, if you like, an alternative approach. Against certain other teams in the Premier League, maybe we will, again, line up with a 4-3-3. But with, say, for example, with Thiago in the side, maybe we'll use Thiago's central penetration more against Newcastle than we will against Manchester United. So there's different. I think we'll always impose different tactical approaches, different ideas against every opposition. It's just it won't always be absolutely clear to see if we're setting up with the usual players and the usual 4-3-3.
And finally, then, before we move on to some sort of deeper questions around the Liverpool squad and the system at large, Matt Haycock says, I know only time will tell, but do you see the Villa result as another pivotal game in Klopp's reign? I think he's referring there to some of the other heavy defeats Liverpool have had. They've always bounced back well. Is this going to be a game that we look back on in time and say that was the moment something changed, or is this one just a blip?
This is tricky. I am inclined to think it's a anomaly. It's a bit of a blip. I like to call it a wake-up call, really. Because I don't think Liverpool need to learn any more lessons, tactically at least, specifically Klopp. Like, I think when we got beat 4-1 at Spurs, I think we had both fullbacks, bombing on down the line. And I think from that match onwards, Klopp kind of learned that his protection and the players behind the ball has to be a lot better. I think when we faced Sevilla in the Champions League and we were 3-0 up at half-time and we ended up drawing 3-3, that was kind of a lesson. We need to be better on the controlling side in terms of managing match scenarios, sort of thing. And then shock, we bring in Allison, Van Dijk and Firmino, all of whom are quite cool-headed and able to manage situations more so than the intense players maybe that we'd bought before that. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's maybe just. I think after Liverpool dominated Chelsea, dominated Arsenal, beat Leeds 4-3, saw that Manchester City had dropped points already. Maybe Liverpool took not necessarily complacency, but just a bit of, we don't even need to be at our best to win this league. And maybe this is a bit of a wake-up call that, yes, you do, sort of thing. Get yourselves to grips.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that one does play out. Let's move on then and talk about goalkeeping. We'll start at the back end of the pitch and maybe work our way forward. We'll have to see how we go with this. But yeah, Adrian came in for a lot of criticism after the game, Josh, and Declan Griffin says, is there much of a difference in overall performance when Adrian starts, or is the difference actually minuscule? We're all sort of talking about Adrian, but how much of an impact, a difference does he, rather than Allison, actually make?
Well, his actual impact on Liverpool performance, at least, between both boxes, it shouldn't really be that big because he's a goalkeeper. So Liverpool should still be able to dominate. Liverpool should still be able to take 20 plus shots while keeping the opposing team to about 5 or 10. That shouldn't change. It did change against Villa for whatever reason. So, that wasn't Adrian's fault. But in terms of the performance levels, it shouldn't really take much of a hit. I think he maybe offers a bit of a negative when it comes to building from the back and stuff like that because he's not as good with his feet as Allison is. But Liverpool should still be a great, a great team, really, being able to simply dominate the attacking side while dominating the defensive side as well. It's as simple as that, really. But when it comes to the individual level of Adrian and Allison, specifically when it comes to facing shots, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about, there's a chasm, there's a big gap.
Yeah, we will get to that one. And actually, John Achterberg and the whole goalkeeping structure, actually, we've got a really interesting question on that to get into. But before that, on Allison, we'll focus on him for a little bit. Jared Benny and various people have got in touch on this one. Obviously, Allison was injured at the beginning of last season. He picked up that injury, actually, that missed the Atletico Madrid game, and he would have missed the derby had, obviously, the lockdown and everything not happened. So the question is, are you worried that Allison might be becoming slightly injury prone? And if so, is Adrian good enough to be the backup, or should Liverpool have looked for an alternative that better suits the playing style?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote about this week for Liverpool.com. So if you wanna read that, I assume if you just Google, Liverpool.com, Adrian, Josh Williams, I assume it'll come up. and it was kind of an opinion piece, really. But it is a bit. I tweeted it as well. It is a bit of a concern because I think when you sign a backup goalkeeper, you expect them to play at most the domestic cups, and you expect your primary goalkeeper to play in the majority of the major competitions. That isn't really the case at the minute. I think last season, Adrian played about 1,000 to 1,500 minutes in the Premier League and the Champions League. That is not ideal. And you're leaving yourself open a little bit to the elements of chance, because Liverpool might keep the opposing team down to 5 shots, 6 shots a game. But if those shots are going against Adrian, there's just a risk that he's just going to concede them. And it has got to the point a little bit with me where Liverpool could concede a completely legitimate goal, and rather than me thinking, fair enough, I'm overly keen to look at what Adrian was doing and thinking to myself, could he have done better there? Even if he couldn't have. And I don't want to be thinking like that. It was how I thought with Mignolet. It was how I thought with Karius. And Adrian is in the same bracket for me.
Yeah, on that then, we've got a quick one that we can just sort of knock on the head here from Paul Whelan. Says, do you think with Allison now missing for a while that Liverpool should adopt a slightly less higher line? We've already spoke, of course, quite a bit about the high line than they have at the start of the season. In addition to Allison being a far superior keeper than Adrian, Allison would also seem to be more of a sweeper keeper, helping to reduce that gap between the defence and goalkeeper. So not the sweeper keeper playing out from the back part here. Is Paul getting at? It seems sort of more on that actually sweeping up the sweeper part of being a sweeper keeper.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question because I have thought about it myself, but then it kind of, there's a bit of confliction there because you would think that a high defensive line would kind of leave the goalkeeper a little bit vulnerable, sort of thing. But it in a way, it does the opposite. And the reason it does the opposite is because one of the perks of a high defensive line, the reason a high defensive line is employed by the best coaches in the world, is because it does result in you facing about 5-6 shots a game as opposed to maybe 13 or something like that. Because you're defending so far from goal and you're so dominant for large periods, it does result in it should result in your goalkeeper not having much to do. I understand he's obviously going to be a bit vulnerable when the opposing team do get in every now and then. Maybe if it's just once or twice a match, then he's got to deal with a 1v1. That's less than ideal for Adrian. But at the same time, the high line should keep shots away from him. It keeps the ball as far away from him as possible. Like, for example, Europe's top 5 leagues last season, the team to face the fewest number of shots in Europe per 90 was Manchester City. Obviously, they play with a high line. They faced 6 per 90. Then you got Getafe. I think they've got a pretty intense press. Chelsea, they had a bit of a deep press, a bit of a high press. Liverpool are up there. Bayern Munich are up there. So these teams are playing with a high press, and as a result, they're giving the goalkeeper less to do, not more to do. But I understand in terms of he's far from ideally suited to being a sweeper. So it's a question for Klopp, I suppose.
Yeah, I think interesting there that you mentioned Chelsea didn't face as many shots per game. Obviously, we've spoken on this podcast plenty about Kepa Arrizabalaga, but anyway, let's get on to more of the goalkeeping stuff. And Al J says, have the normally excellent Liverpool analytics team perhaps got a blind spot to goalkeepers? Too much reliance on John Achterberg with a number of errors over the years, except for Allison. This is a really interesting one for me, Josh, because we see so many teams when they're looking to recruit a goalkeeper effectively get it wrong. It's a difficult one to sort of put a goalkeeper into a certain system. You don't know until they're there, maybe, how well they're going to perform.
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure it's a blind spot. I think it's possibly more of a perception in the past that a goalkeeper isn't worth that much in terms of what he deserves from the budget. Obviously, Liverpool put probably the majority of their budget towards attacking players because they make the difference. And I think in the past, maybe we looked at the goalkeeping position as not having that big of an impact. Hence why we signed Carriers for about 6 million, I think it was. Didn't really think too much of it. Obviously, I think we learned further down the line it has a massive impact on particularly points and actually getting over the line, securing wins and stuff like that. Hence why we then paid 70 odd for, I think it was Allison. And I think, again, looking at Adrian, it was deemed to be, a value thing. How much is he worth? How much is a backup goalkeeper worth? Virtually pennies, really. So you dedicate pennies to it and you get Adrian in for a free transfer. I think the problem is he's now not really playing the role of a backup keeper. He's starting more matches than you want him to start. And as a result of that, maybe Liverpool are going to assess down the line, maybe the backup position for us is worth a little bit more and I'll dedicate maybe 5 million to it, 10 million to it. But I think Liverpool have been really good at looking at each position in the squad and thinking to themselves, how much is that position worth to us? Say, for example, a backup left back for Andy Robertson. He's not going to play much. The backup left back's worth about 11 million. We offer Jamal Lewis 11 million. Norwich say no. So we get Kostas Tsimikas for 11 million. Simple as that, really. So I think it's a value thing. Value things with positions. And I think we realised with Allison, I think we looked at Adrian and thought he's a backup keeper. He's just cheap. But now maybe that's getting reconsidered.
Yeah, it must be a penny for Simon Mignolet's thoughts. We did get a question, incidentally, on Loris Karius, but just to let the listener viewer know, he's moved out on loan, actually, to Union Berlin, so he's not even about for Liverpool to call upon now. Let's move on from the goalkeeping, though, and talk a bit maybe more about the system then at large. We've spoken about the high defensive line, but James Sweeney asks, why is Liverpool's defensive system looking so open since lockdown? We've said by and large, actually, Liverpool have a good defensive foundation, but James is seeing it differently right now, Josh.
Yeah, it is. It's a tricky one, to be honest, because we haven't always looked that open. In certain games, we're absolutely flawless, and I think it's we obviously like to put proof in our opinions on this show, but I am inclined to lean towards maybe there's a little bit of a mental thing, just switching off a little bit. Liverpool were so good for 2 years when it comes to not even defending, when it comes to just zero mistakes, just no mistakes, complete concentration, permanently. No silly errors, no gifts. And we've started to play high-risk football, which we've always done, really. But now kind of with a bit of, I don't know, just not complete focus, not complete in control of situations, just a little bit of, it's a difficult one to cover, really. Just a bit more the kind of approach that you do if you just won the league and you just won the Champions League and you just delivered 99 points and all that sort of stuff. Just not entirely taking care of absolutely everything. But I think in terms of looking so open, I do think a lot of it is probably just your eyes deceiving you, considering offsides now aren't given until the ball has actually gone out of play, and obviously your heart's in your mouth, holding on to things and stuff like that, when it was never really a chance anyway. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one. I'm not really sure where I stand on this one.
Is it on this just a? So my thought quickly on it, just you and Dave often sort of say this whole Liverpool team front to back are almost analytic streams in terms of these players put out numbers that really are mind-boggling week in, week out on such a consistent basis. On the point you're making there about the concentration thing, is it the players are showing they're human, actually, and sometimes within the data sets you can't legislate for it?
Yeah, it is possible. I mean, some people have mentioned about the lack of fans in the ground, which I suppose can have some sort of impact on intensity levels and focus. But yeah, Liverpool have been described by quite a few pundits really as machines, really, and we have been a little bit like that for 2 years. Zero mistakes. Any goals that you get against Liverpool, you have to truly earn. And maybe we've given a few freebies out in the past few months since the title win. Yeah, it's a different one. It's a difficult one. Sorry, It's not one that I'm prepared to commit to really at the minute.
No, fair enough. Well, Dyson Pillay says, and I think this might be going back over a little bit of the ground we did cover before, but interesting point nonetheless. Is it my imagination or are players trying a lot more low percentage passes? Trent and Bobby especially seem to be trying more risky passes, and when possession's lost, the rest of the midfield's out of position, which makes it easier for the opposition to progress up the field very easily. Is that the game plan that Villa executed, nailed on the head there?
Well, I was going to say that question probably stems from the Villa game, and it definitely did happen a lot at Villa Park. But I think certain players are just permitted to attempt low percentage passes. It's almost encouraged for certain players to just try things because they are the creative players. They are the players who are responsible for opening things up, compared to maybe a Wijnaldum who's responsible for just protection, security, keep things compact. So I think players like Trent in particular, Salah, these players give the ball away roughly about 25% of the time, I think it is. But that's encouraged. But I think the difference is you've got to make sure you're doing it when the time's right. You've got to do it when the structure is right, when the protection is in place. And I think Klopp said after the Villa game, that wasn't really the case. And as a result, we got opened up. I think Dean Smith said after the game, I think it was Dean Smith, might have been Ollie Watkins actually, but I think one of them mentioned that one of the things they worked on during the week was on the defensive side, block off passing lanes really. And if you block off passing lanes, maybe Trent will force a pass, Gomez will force a pass, it'll go to the feet of John McGinn, and then straight away Villa can get straight onto Liverpool's last line, so it can cause problems. You just got to make sure that you're making good decisions on the ball, and Liverpool just didn't do it. But the whole low percentage passes thing, it's not really an issue providing you've got the protection in place and providing everybody isn't doing the whole low percentage passes thing.
Yeah, no, certainly. Let's then talk maybe about tactical switches. We have touched a bit on sort of how Klopp does actually vary things up, but Kyle Maguire and Janet Wiley have a similar question, and I'm going to throw David Wilson's in there as well. The question being, do you think a change of system to 4-2-3-1 might help Liverpool be a bit more secure at the back? And then also on top of that, have a double pivot of Thiago and Fabinho together. And David's part of the question is then I suppose that would allow Diogo Jota to join the front three and maybe take a bit of pressure off Roberto Firmino.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, 4-2-3-1 can certainly help in certain matches, particularly when you're against a team that are just inclined to contest for a point. Some teams are just happy to leave with a draw, maybe even leave with a loss sometimes if it's just a 1-0 defeat. So, the major difference really between 4-2-3-1 and 4-3-3 is that rather than selecting a third midfielder, you're opting for an additional attacker instead. So it just makes you that bit more attack-minded, that bit less focused on midfield protection / control sort of thing. But then if you deploy a player like Thiago, who just naturally offers you an element of control, you will get that back despite the fact that you've got one less midfielder in your team. So yeah, I think it's useful against certain teams. I don't think it's a big shift is needed. I still think Klopp will favour 4-3-3. But yeah, it's just about in certain matches. Do you want 3 midfielders and 3 attackers? Or do you want to sacrifice a midfielder for an additional attacker, really? And I think Klopp's always had better midfielders than attackers outside the front 3. So it makes sense for Liverpool to use a midfield 3 most of the time.
We've still 20 minutes to go, getting through as many of your questions as possible. Again, thanks for sending so many. And it's beginning to dawn on me now, Josh, just how many we do have. But change of focus once again, and mentioned Firmino maybe benefiting from a change to 4-2-3-1. And he's going to be sort of the focus of the next few questions. And Terry Vincent says, is it time to seriously think about Firmino's role in the team? We love him when we know he is great for us, but the fact he's not scoring, do you think it needs to change things up, maybe with Minamino playing, or in fact both of them?
I think with Firmino, one thing I should probably say, when it comes to judging him, what you think of Firmino, whether you think he's good or not, whether you think he should be scoring more goals or not, don't analyse him as though he's a number 9. That's a traditional Premier League striker. Analyse him as though he's a number 10. So if he was a number 10 and he was playing exactly how he's playing, would you still be concerned that he's not scoring enough? Or that's the main thing, really, that's levelled at him, that he doesn't score enough. So if Firmino was number 10 and our two strikers were Salah and Mane, which is the case, really, in terms of how the system works, would he still be getting the criticism that he gets? I think probably not. And I think if you was to take Firmino out the side and put in a number 9 who scores more goals, the system would be completely, yeah, it would be completely different, really, especially if it's a fast number 9. Say, for example, if you was to deploy Jamie Vardy. If Jamie Vardy was to play as Liverpool's number 9, Jamie Vardy, instead of coming into midfield, he runs behind the defence. So you would have Mane running behind the defence, Salah running behind the defence, and Vardy running behind the defence. No players really occupying the 10 space. And it's just not as well balanced. The dynamic isn't as clean. With Firmino in the middle and Mane and Salah either side, both operating on the inside with the preferred foot, it just works. There's not a lot of players that can do that, and it naturally blends well for Liverpool. Kai Havertz could probably do it, but it's quite a rare player who's basically a number 10 but can work as a number 9. Minamino is one of the few who can do it. I think he is kind of like a mini Firmino, really. But in terms of taking Firmino out and putting Minamino in from the start, I think I wouldn't do it personally. Like the way Jota's been signed potentially as an heir to Sadio Mane, I think Minamino's been signed rather than an heir, more as just a backup. When Firmino needs a rest, put Minamino in. Minamino can bring up the intensity levels. He can press. His use of the ball is really good. Keeps the ball cleanly, technically. So, yeah, I wouldn't question that one too much. Although I do appreciate that Firmino's not in the best of form.
Yeah, no, he certainly isn't in the greatest form right now. So then, in terms of Firmino and his goal scoring, you have answered it in part there. But Christian Lee says, how has Firmino's finishing developed during his time at Liverpool? What's his XG to his actual goals scored like? And what is it so far this season? Because he's another, like many Reds, who's worried about Firmino's goal-scoring exploits so far this season, and I suppose even going back to last year, just one home Premier League goal all season.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to expected goals, in his first, this is according to Understat, so in his first season at Liverpool, Premier League only, he had an XG of about 7 and scored 10. So he's overperformed. Year after, an XG of about 10, scored 11. That's pretty much level. Season after, an XG of about 11, scored 15. So he overperformed again. But then the past 3 seasons, excluding the current season, he's underperformed by just under 2. Then last season, he underperformed by about 8. And this season, his XG so far is only 0.7. And he hasn't scored yet, so that's an underperformance of 0.7. No point in really mentioning that. So it's a bit all over the place, really. Initially started off as a slight overperformer. Last season, he was a big underperformer. It basically just means he's probably quite an average finisher. And I've spoken in the past about the way he finishes chances. I think he's quite a maverick in terms of the way he shoots. I don't think he shoots like a conventional forward would. He seems to use the outside of his foot when he doesn't need to. Back heels, no look finishes, and all this sort of stuff. So I don't think it's his biggest strength, but I don't overly think it's that concerning considering what I've just said in terms of he is a number 10, not a number 9. So would you be this concerned about his finishing, about his goal scoring? If he was playing as a strict number 10 for Liverpool, probably not.
And on that point of him being a number 10 and with Salah and Mane, do we need to think more of them, of being the strikers in this team? And actually, that if you had a number 9 who, like you said before, like Jamie Vardy, who went in behind, probably in terms of the balance of a team, wouldn't be possible to have 3 strikers on the pitch at any one time. So actually, with him in the team, it facilitates having 2 strikers as opposed to 1 lethal number 9.
Yeah, I mean, the typical perception would be that, the player with the number 9 on his back and the player who plays in the middle of the pitch as the highest player is the man who's got to get the goals, the man who's the goal scorer. But it's not really how modern football works. The main goal scorers in the modern game really are out wide, unless you're Jamie Vardy, unless you're Lewandowski, a player like that. But even Arsenal, you're an Arsenal fan. Since Arteta moved into the Emirates, Aubameyang, Arsenal's biggest goal scorer, is playing on the left because he cuts inside with his right foot and he's able to finish. Marcus Rashford is playing on the left. It just makes sense sometimes considering the dynamics of the system and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I think for me, Salah and Mane are very much, they're not strikers, but they are forwards. They are the main goal getters for Liverpool, sort of thing, with Firmino firmly in 3rd place and quite a way off, really.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we're going to move on from Roberto Firmino now. We've spoken about the high line, but we are, for a moment, going to speak about the defence and just the makeup of it. Sean O'Connor says, as a centre-back is likely to be the area we recruit next, should aerial dominance be the main criteria? Not the reason for Gomez's poor game on Sunday against Villa, but it was the reason that Klopp replaced him with Lovren at Watford in February to deal with Deeney. So is that an area where Liverpool do need to look at, and another dominant centre-back to go alongside Virgil van Dijk?
Well, what you've just said there is the key line for me. I think any centre-back that's signed by Liverpool has to be dominant. That's the key word. Regardless of whether he's good with the ball, all that sort of stuff, he has to be a dominant player when it comes to whoever he's facing, or most players he's facing. He's able to just, in a way, bully, basically. But I'll take you back to a quote that Pep Lijnders said in his press conference today, pretty much sums it up perfectly. He said, as a pressing team, you have to accept a lot of long balls and second balls. So it's important that you have centre-backs who are good in the air so that they can win the first challenge. So in terms of the question, yeah, I'd say you're spot on. One of the biggest factors in a Liverpool centre-back is aerial dominance. Huge factor, and I think it's weighted in the decision-making process as to who's suitable and who isn't. I think aerial prowess is weighted quite heavily, whereas at the Etihad, for example, I think Manchester City maybe put a bit too much weight in whether a player is left-footed or right-footed, sort of thing, particularly as a centre-back. I think it matters, but not to the extent that you're sacrificing all kinds of aerial fragility and all this sort of stuff. So obviously you weigh defenders differently, the skills are weighted differently, and I think Liverpool put a lot of emphasis on aerial dominance.
Yeah, certainly. Shibu Sandhu says, I've said all season that Liverpool shouldn't be after a 4th choice centre-back, but actually a partner for Van Dijk, with Matip and Gomez fighting it out to be second fiddle. He asks about looking at Gomez's underlying numbers and how they stack up against other centre-halves around the world of a similar profile and age, etc., etc. But I know there's a player in particular that you like, Josh, who I'm sure you'd love to see Liverpool sign next summer, who has a release clause that kicks in a certain Dayot Upamecano. Can you imagine him alongside Virgil van Dijk?
Yeah, well, I mean that'd be a big thing. I think Upamecano plays on the left, doesn't he? With which is where Van Dijk plays. I'm not really sure on that one. I have to double check that, but he is, if you're looking for the heir to Van Dijk or the next in line sort of thing, or another club wants their own version of Van Dijk, I would go down the route of Upamecano. Yeah, I think he's a top player in terms of being dominant. He is a dominant player, whether the ball's on the floor or whether it's in the air. But just to put Gomez's numbers into perspective, so last season there was 95 centre backs in Europe's top 5 leagues that played over 1,000 minutes and were under the age of 25. So that's 95. Gomez ranked 24th for aerial success and 53rd for defensive duel success. Not particularly outstanding, but I don't entirely think you can look solely on numbers when it comes to defenders. I think you have to consider a bit more than that. And the numbers don't always capture what they do. And I think if you watch Gomez, I do think he's in control of most situations. I think he's certainly a lot faster than most centre backs, which comes into it when you're using a high line. Obviously, when you want him back towards your own goal, his recovery pace is great. So yeah, I'm not overly concerned about Gomez. I do think he gets caught out every now and then with how aggressive he is, and teams end up going in right behind him because he gets dragged out. I think Matip is a bit different. But apart from the game against Villa, where I do think he was quite terrible, to be honest, I think he's one who's going to spend his whole career at Liverpool, hopefully.
Yeah, certainly. Well, last couple of minutes, we're going to do some quick fire questions to really rattle through some. But before we get to that, another one on the defence. And Joe Gomez, not the only one who's come in for some criticism after the Villa game, as you'd understand. A couple of people asking questions about Trent Alexander-Arnold. We've got one just asking simply from Tom, what do you make of Trent's start to the season? He's been sloppy for me. And Aidan as well asks, would there be any logic in moving Van Dijk from the left to the right side of centre-back to help out Trent, as teams do seem to be targeting that? And it would also mean that Gomez, therefore, would be alongside Andy Robertson, who might be a bit better defensively than Trent. Your thoughts on those, Josh?
In terms of him being sloppy, I think maybe his impact, his usual impact, hasn't been quite as clear to see on Liverpool's game, particularly on the attacking side of things. Maybe, I mean, there's a rumour that he had coronavirus in pre-season. As a result, he didn't really play any of the pre-season games. So his pre-season has kind of been since we played Leeds. I think he looked good against Arsenal. Thought he would improve on that, but didn't really against Villa, but none of the team really did. So I don't think that's too much of a concern. I think he'll just pick up speed, and his numbers look pretty normal. He's averaging 2 key passes per 90 this season. That means he's setting up 2 shots per 90. Last season it was 2.4. Season before it was 1.75. So not a lot to worry about there, I don't think. But I'd expect his influence to grow as the season progresses. And what was the second part of that question?
Should Van Dijk and Gomez effectively swap so there's more balance defensively?
Yeah, I think one thing Klopp would worry about with that would be the message that it'd send to Gomez, to Trent. It looks a bit desperate to move Van Dijk over. You are kind of presenting the image that, you know, we need our best defender on that side because we look weak. And I think Van Dijk is naturally left-sided anyway. His cross-field diagonal passes that we saw against Arsenal quite a lot, he wouldn't really be able to do as effectively if he was on the right of the defence as opposed to the left. So it's something I've thought about, but I can't really ever see it happening.
Right. Okay. Let's just before we do the quick fire questions, a couple of questions just about general statistics. Thomas Stewart's got in touch. Says, "All right, boys, why do you think there's been so many goals in the Premier League? Does anything stand out in comparison to last year's data?"
Penalties. Penalties certainly stands out. There's a lot being given that maybe shouldn't have been given and weren't given last season. Obviously, the lack of pre-season is probably going to play a part on sharpness, on organisation sort of thing. In terms of the data, I don't really think much has showed up. I haven't really checked whether there's more shots happening or not. But I just think generally, when you think of, I mean, this isn't entirely true, but when you think of attacking play and defensive play, you probably associate defending more with being trained on a training ground and it being a team thing. Whereas when it comes to attacking, it is a bit more individualistic, really. So I think if anything's going to suffer when it comes to a lack of pre-season, it's probably going to be the defensive side of the game. But it is, and just on top of that as well, a lot of good players being brought to the league, a lot of good attacking players being brought to the league in comparison to seasons gone by. So, it is difficult to keep these players out at the end of the day.
Yeah, with Dave not being here, we shouldn't sort of say how well James Rodriguez has done. Certainly not on a Liverpool podcast. But anyway, let's. Just one quick question from Jim Matthew. Very quick answer here, Josh. Is there a website from which we can find data you use in your analysis? Is there any resource available free of cost or for a nominal monthly fee?
So the free of cost stuff, I would recommend understaff.com and I would recommend fbref.com. When you first click on those sites, you are just kind of inundated with numbers and it probably is a little bit intimidating. But once you get to know the platform, get to know the site, it is really, really useful, especially if you know how to interpret numbers and stuff like that. There's obviously Wisecout, what we use, but we use that mainly for clips because the stats on that site aren't entirely reliable, and that is paid for as well. So, but yeah, Understat and FBref are more than good enough for analytics sort of thing.
Well, let's get then into some quickfire ones. We've got 5 questions here to rattle through. Maybe not one-word answers, Josh, but as close to as you can. First one's from Blank Name. Thank you, Blank Name, for getting in touch. Says, who do you think will score most goals for us this season?
I probably lean towards Salah, simply because he shoots the most, takes the penalties, and yeah, I'm going to go with Salah.
Next one is Mark Weeks, Brewster or Origi?
Tough one. Brewster. But I think the difference here is that Brewster's at the start of his career, needs to play football and would be limited minutes at Liverpool. Origi, not so much. I think he's probably happy being 5th or 6th choice at Liverpool. We got 23.5 million for Brewster during the pandemic. Probably not going to get that for Origi. So I think all those things come into consideration when it comes to keeping one and selling one, as opposed to just keeping the best.
Osman's got in touch and says, I don't know if he asked this before or since Marco Grujic has gone on loan to Porto, but says, does Marco Grujic have a future at Liverpool?
I don't think so, personally. I think he's going to be sold. I think we'll give him a lot of time. I think he's developed quite a bit as well. I think he's a good level player, capable for probably a fair amount of Premier League teams, to be honest. Obviously spending time on loan at Porto now. Porto is a well-established European side. But the competition and the standard that you have to reach now, obviously as Grujic's bar is raised, Liverpool's bar is raised as well, probably even higher. So to play in central midfield for Liverpool, you have to be really complete and you have to offer real solutions. And I don't think Grujic is at that level whereby, he's gonna be good enough to fill up a squad space. I think he'll probably be sold.
These last two are brilliant ones. Oh, sorry, these last two are brilliant. Carl Greenwood says, if Liverpool brought Mbappe on the final day of the window, we can all dream, who would he replace in the front three, Josh?
Sadio Mane. And the reason for that is because of the dynamic that we've spoken about. Mbappe can't play as Firmino. Mbappe can't really play as Salah because Salah's left-footed. Mbappe prefers his right. So if you was to keep the Liverpool dynamic that Klopp's kind of established over the past few years, Mbappe plays on the left of Liverpool's front three, which is where Mane plays. And it'll be interesting to see if anything in the future happens regarding one of them two. I don't think Firmino will be sold, but I think there's a possibility that FSG, I think they did it in New York, Boston, with the Red Sox players. I think one of them, high-profile player, was sold just to kind of to cash in, really. So it'll be interesting to see if if Liverpool do that at some point with Salah or Mane, just to kind of, a bit like what Real Madrid did with Cristiano Ronaldo. He's at the end of his career. He's still good, but because he's at the end of his career, just kind of accept 100 million for him and move on.
Right, last one. I think it's the best question of all of them that have been sent in, actually. Andrew Moffat, this is where you earn your money, Josh. Start one, bench one, sell one. Allison, Virgil, Mane.
I was hoping you weren't going to say this. Oh, God. It depends. I need context on this. Is this considered in the current squad? Because obviously,
I think so. Yeah, no, I think it's fair. Sort of where Liverpool are at now. What would you do
if I was to bench Allison? Adrian will play then. Is that what that means?
Yep. Yeah. It's as of today. If you had to make this decision, what are you doing with all of these players?
I am selling Mane and oh God, I am probably benching Van Dijk. Mainly, honestly, it's mainly because Adrian's. I just have zero faith in him. I think he's terrible, to be honest. Without being too harsh. Whereas the backup for Van Dijk would probably be Firmino with Thiago in the midfield, which is fine. The backup for Mane would be Jota. And I think, although Mane's really unique and incredible player as well, I think getting a fast, wide forward who's right-footed and scores goals is doable. You know, you think of Jadon Sancho, Marcus Rashford, Heung-min Son.
Diogo Jota's just arrived.
Diogo Jota, Aubameyang. These players are quite popular, really. So I think Mane could be replaced in the market, but I think, yeah, it's a tough question. It's a horrible question, to be honest.
I think that question really, and how you've answered it, really is all about the drop-off in terms of who's next cab off the rank in the Liverpool squad. Where is the biggest drop-off? Probably in goal. Well, that's it from us here on this edition of Analysing Anfield. Thanks to absolutely everybody who sent in questions. We've tried to get through as many of them as we possibly can. Next week, of course, we'll be looking ahead to the derby. I think we're going to drag Dave back from his holidays for that one. But from myself, Guy Clarke, thanks for joining us here on Analysing Anfield. Josh Williams, as ever, absolute expertise and insight as ever. But thanks for joining us. That's all for now. Goodbye.
Thanks.